Right now, if you look at the satellite imagery of the northwestern Saudi desert, you will see a massive jagged trench cut directly into the barren sand. This was supposed to be the future of human civilization, a $500 billion sci-fi utopia called Neom. But over the last few months, something disastrous has quietly happened. The unlimited money is drying up, the grand vision is violently collapsing, and Western media is laughing, calling it the ultimate failure of an arrogant prince who flew too close to the sun. But they are completely missing the point. Because while the world is distracted by the death of a shiny desert mirage, Mohammed bin Salman is executing a completely different, far more dangerous strategy in the shadows. The scariest part about the collapse of Saudi Arabia's biggest dream is that the failure might actually be the ultimate trap. Most people think the Saudi story is simple. They think it is just about endless oceans of oil, gold-plated supercars, and royals with infinite bank accounts. It is not. It is about a ticking clock. A desperate, terrifying race against time to prevent the total collapse of one of the most powerful and ruthless families on the planet. For 80 years, the global economy ran on a very simple, unspoken agreement. Washington provides the military protection, the fighter jets, and the diplomatic cover. In exchange, Riyadh pumps the cheap crude oil that keeps the American empire running and prices it exclusively in US dollars. But that equation is currently shattering. The world is transitioning away from fossil fuels, and the men sitting in the heavily fortified palaces of Riyadh know a dark, undeniable truth. They know that if they do not completely reinvent their country before the global demand for oil crashes, their kingdom will sink back into the desert dust. So, they panicked, and they pitched the world a hallucination. Let's rewind for a second, because this is where the geopolitical illusion starts to make sense. Back in 2017, a young, utterly ruthless crown prince named Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, effectively seized total control of the Saudi state. He did not just want to rule, he wanted to become the most important geopolitical player of the 21st century. To do that, he purged his rivals, locked his own billionaire cousins in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and centralized all power around himself. To fully grasp how ruthless this pivot was, you have to look at what MBS did inside his own borders. He didn't just consolidate power, he rewired the entire psychology of his nation. He stripped the religious police of their authority, opened movie theaters, and allowed women to drive. To the West, this was sold as progressive reform, but it was actually a brilliant political calculation. He was buying the loyalty of the Saudi youth, ensuring that when he made these massive, dangerous geopolitical gambles, there would be no internal uprising to stop him. He neutralized his domestic threats so he could focus entirely on conquering the global chessboard. But when he looked at the national spreadsheets, he saw a nightmare. Over 70% of his government's revenue came from a single liquid that the rest of the world was actively trying to outlaw. He needed a pivot. He needed Western investors to pour trillions of dollars into his country to build a post-oil economy. But there was a massive problem. Nobody in Silicon Valley or Wall Street wanted to invest heavily in a hyper-conservative, closed-off desert kingdom with a horrific human rights record. He needed a marketing gimmick so spectacular, so mind-bending, that the global elites would drool over it. Enter Vision 2030, and the absolute crown jewel of that vision was Neom. Imagine sitting in a sleek, dimly lit boardroom in New York City. Saudi officials are showing you high-definition holographic projections of something called the Line. A mirror city 170 kilometers long, taller than the Empire State Building, slicing through the desert. It is pitched as running entirely on green energy, featuring flying taxis, robotic maids, and an artificial moon. It sounded like a massive-budget Netflix sci-fi series. But MBS backed it up with the Public Investment Fund, a sovereign wealth box loaded with nearly $1 trillion in pure oil cash. The message to the West was very simple. We are not a backwards oil state anymore. We are the capital of the future. Come take our money. And for a little while it actually worked. Western consultants flooded into Riyadh. High-priced architects drew up impossible blueprints. Politicians who previously condemned the kingdom suddenly found themselves smiling and shaking hands in the desert. But that was only the beginning. Because reality has a nasty habit of destroying illusions. Fast forward to today, and that grand illusion is crashing down hard. Turns out, building a 100-mile-long glass skyscraper in the middle of a scorching wasteland is not just physically impossible, it is financial suicide. The math simply does not add up. Building the line was not going to cost $500 billion. Internal financial leaks suggest the real price tag was closer to $1.5 trillion. To put that insane number in perspective, that is almost the entire economic output of Australia poured into a single, unproven glass hallway in the desert. Suddenly, the infinite Saudi piggy bank started looking a little light. Foreign direct investment, the actual money from outside the kingdom that MBS desperately needed to make this work, completely flatlined. Western corporations were incredibly happy to take billions in Saudi consulting fees, but they flat-out refused to risk their own capital. The kingdom was bleeding cash. By early 2024, the terrifying reality set in. The line was officially scaled back. Instead of 170 kilometers, they are now hoping to finish just 2.4 kilometers by 2030. From a civilization-defining mega-project to a very expensive, very awkward shopping mall in the middle of nowhere. Now pay attention to what happens next, because this is where the entire narrative of a failed Saudi state starts collapsing. The mainstream media looked at the shrinking city, laughed and declared MBS a failure. But inside the royal court, there was zero panic. Because American intelligence and global financial elites suddenly realized a terrifying truth. MBS never needed the mirror city to actually be built. He just needed it to buy him enough time to completely rewire global politics. And this is the exact moment Washington realized they had a very serious problem on their hands. If you cannot build the future, you buy the things the West cannot live without. While everyone was pointing and laughing at Neom, the Saudi Public Investment Fund unleashed a financial blitzkrieg on global culture. They didn't just sponsor a few golf tournaments. They literally bought the sport of golf. They fractured the PGA, waved billions of dollars in front of the world's best athletes, and forced a historic American sporting institution into a humiliating merger. But it wasn't just golf. It was Formula One racing. It was elite European soccer clubs. It was global boxing. It was the absolute aggressive takeover of the video game and esports industry. To the average viewer, this looks like a rich kid buying expensive toys. But to a geopolitical strategist, this is called soft power blackmail. MBS realized something brilliant. If he owns the cultural institutions that Western populations worship, Western politicians can never truly touch him. You cannot sanction the guy who owns your favorite sports team. You cannot isolate the country that bankrolls your global entertainment. He was quietly embedding Saudi money so deeply into the fabric of Western society that extracting it would cause an economic heart attack. But that was just the appetizer. Here is the political chess game nobody is talking about on the evening news. In 2018, after the brutal and highly publicized assassination of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the United States promised to make Saudi Arabia a global pariah. On the campaign trail, President Biden openly vowed to isolate MBS. American politicians banged their fists on podiums, declaring the end of the US-Saudi alliance. The rhetoric was fierce. How did MBS respond? Did he apologize? Did he beg Washington for forgiveness? Absolutely not. He picked up the phone and called Beijing. This next move changed everything. MBS understood that America's greatest fear wasn't human rights abuses. It was losing control of the Middle East to China. So he rolled out the red carpet for Chinese President Xi Jinping. He signed massive technology and infrastructure deals with Chinese state-owned companies. He started hinting just loudly enough for the CIA to hear that Saudi Arabia might start pricing some of its massive oil sales in Chinese yuan instead of US dollars. The petrodollar, the very foundation of American economic dominance, was suddenly on the table as a bargaining chip. And to twist the knife even further, he brokered a historic peace deal with his sworn enemy, Iran, and he let China take all the credit for it. Washington watched in absolute horror. The so-called pariah state was suddenly the kingmaker of the new multipolar world. But the strategy didn't stop with a single visit from Xi Jinping. In 2023, Saudi Arabia did something that would have been considered an act of political treason just a decade ago. They joined BRICS, the economic bloc led by China and Russia, specifically designed to dismantle American financial dominance. Suddenly, the country that helped create the petrodollar was sitting at the table with the nations actively trying to destroy it. This wasn't just a pivot. It was a warning shot aimed directly at the Federal Reserve, and it worked flawlessly. And what happened next shocked the world. The American president, the exact same man who promised to isolate the kingdom, flew to Jeddah and gave MBS a fist bump on live television. MBS forced the most powerful empire in human history to swallow its pride and effectively beg for lower oil prices to save domestic elections. He proved that the United States needs Saudi Arabia far more than Saudi Arabia needs the United States. He wasn't building a physical fortress in the desert, he was building a geopolitical fortress. By playing Washington against Beijing, he guaranteed that both superpowers would desperately fight to protect his regime. If you want to understand the real power games shaping the world without the boring mainstream news filters, make sure to subscribe. But the absolute masterstroke of this silent rebuild isn't sports, and it isn't just diplomacy. It is technology. Right now, there is a shadow war being fought over the future of artificial intelligence. To control AI, you need data centers, insane amounts of electricity, and the most advanced microchips on the planet, namely NVIDIA's high-end processors. These chips are the new oil, and Saudi Arabia is buying them by the truckload. While the West thought the kingdom was burning its cash on a glass city, MBS was quietly setting up massive tech investment funds, partnering with Silicon Valley heavyweights. He is transforming the desert, not into a tourist trap, but into an AI sanctuary. Saudi Arabia has the cheap energy required to run massive supercomputers, and they have the blank checks that tech founders dream of. They are positioning themselves to be the neutral data broker between the East and the West. If the US and China economically decouple, Saudi Arabia wants to be the middleman who profits from both sides. So, let's look at the global board today. The $500 billion dream of Neom might be collapsing into a pile of incredibly expensive sand. The futuristic renders might end up as nothing more than a cautionary tale in an architecture textbook. But behind the scenes, the kingdom is stronger, more insulated, and more dangerous than it has ever been. MBS took the leverage of a dying oil industry and successfully converted it into global cultural dominance, a superpower bidding war, and a massive stockpile of advanced technology. He realized that true power doesn't come from building a shiny city that tourists want to visit. True power comes from owning the infrastructure, the politicians, and the algorithms that the world cannot survive without. The grand illusion served its purpose beautifully. It kept the world looking at the mirage, while the real weapons were being forged in the dark. But playing this kind of aggressive, multi-front geopolitical poker comes with a terrifying risk. You can manipulate global superpowers for a while. You can buy Western institutions to shield yourself from consequences. But when you actively play the United States against China, and when you aggressively hoard the technology that will define the next century of warfare, you stop being a simple middle power. You become the ultimate target. And this is where the real danger lies. Saudi Arabia has built a spectacular house of cards balancing directly on the tension between Washington and Beijing. As long as that tension holds, MBS is the most powerful broker on earth. But what happens if the music stops? What happens if the US decides it can no longer tolerate a rogue ally arming itself with Chinese tech? Or what happens if Beijing decides it doesn't need to play nice anymore? The next massive global shockwave won't come from a failed megacity in the desert. It will